G'day, Shane Dowling here from kangaroocourtofaustralia.com. Now I want to have a quick chat in relation to Australian Prime Minister's latest scheme to help his friends become rich from government contracts. It's not something that's new to Scott Morrison. He was sacked in 2006 as Managing Director of Tourism Australia because he got caught playing with the books, doing dodgy contracts, and the federal government was left with no option but to sack him. Now, the Liberal Party don't sack one of their own unless it's criminal conduct, because just minor corruption, they keep them on the books, they keep them in the party. From 2000 to 2004, Scott Morrison was a state president of the Liberal Party, or state director. So he was a hardcore Liberal Party member. Yet in 2006 they sacked him, the federal Liberal government under John Howard, because they left him with no choice. He was doing some real dodgy stuff there at Tourism Australia. Something he's continued to do as Prime Minister. We all know with the sports rorts and all the different rorting that's going on with pork barrelling, buying votes, in effect stealing money from one part of the country and spending it in another part to buy votes to try and win those seats. Now, in the latest scam, it relates to COVID quarantine facility they're looking at setting up, and lo and behold, Scott Morrison's good mates have already profited $80,000. Now, they're on the back pedal in a major way because it's been exposed, but that doesn't mean they won't make money in the future from it if everything stays equal. If Scott Morrison was to win the next election, for example. But let's have a quick look, before we have a better look at that, let's have a quick look at the submarine deal. What people think is that Malcolm Turnbull signed off on the submarine deal back in 2016. Well, he didn't, he announced it then. It wasn't finalised until about 2019, I think February 2019. But in November 2018, they're having trouble finalising the final details of the contract. And Scott Morrison spoke to the French president, said, okay, we'll bring it in-house at the highest levels, president to president. And all of a sudden, David Gazzard, one of Scott Morrison's best friends, one of his closest political advisors, his company, and I'll have to look it up because ECG Advisory Solutions, there's too many of them, they've got too many dodgy companies. ECG Advisory Solutions was employed by the French government. Well, the company that won the tender to supply the submarines, to build them here in Australia and also in France, is majority owned by the French government. So all of a sudden, David Gazzard, Scott Morrison's good mate, is advising the French on finalising the contract. Now, how did that come about? Obviously, Scott Morrison said to the French President Macron, hey, employ my good mate David Gazzard and that'll help smooth things over. That's the only assumption you can come to. That, to my knowledge, there was no tender, no nothing. All of a sudden he's employed. I wrote a number of articles about it, and all of a sudden David Gazzard's disappeared from ECG Advisory Solutions. He's gone. Not long after, he's set up a new company, DPG Advisory Solutions, and that's the one that's tied in with the COVID scam, which we'll have a look at in a minute. But anyhow, in relation to the submarine deal, ECG Advisory Solutions, they had a financial solutions as well, I think, another company. Like I said, too many of them. They've got companies everywhere, like Phoenix companies, they start one up, get a bad reputation, close it down, start another one up. Anyhow, Chairman of Channel 9, Peter Costello, was also a major shareholder in ECG Advisory Solutions. So he too was profiting off the submarine deal, and he too was a close friend and political advisor to Scott Morrison. So you can see how Scott Morrison is lining the pockets of his mates while he's Prime Minister in a major way. So it's, even before the COVID scam, which we're about to look at, Scott Morrison was lining the pockets of his mates. He got caught out running that routine, not necessarily lining the pockets of his mates, but dodgy financial deals when he was Managing Director of Tourism Australia. He's done it with the sports rorts, with all other rorting, pork barrelling. He did it with a submarine deal. Now, my viewpoint is the reason Scott Morrison broke the deal with the French, I think it was getting too hot for him. You'll find that the former president South Africa and the former president Malaysia were both charged in recent times with taking bribes from the French in relation to submarine deals. So I think Scott Morrison might have looked at that and said, well, it's getting too hot to handle for us. Let's break the deals, and especially if we lose the next federal election and the Labor Party bring in a federal ICAC, they could be in a lot of trouble. So I suspect that's why he broke the deal with the French, because it makes no sense, because there is no new deal. The so-called deal with the US and the English isn't a deal, it's just an agreement to review the current situation and potentially do a deal. So it's not a deal at all. So it doesn't explain why he broke off the contract the way he did, as fast as he did. But one thing that would explain it is the fact that the former South African president and the former Malaysian president have both been charged in recent times for taking bribes in relation to submarine contacts. Anyhow, that leads us into the dodgy COVID deal that's been getting some media attention of late. Now, it's worth noting that the old media, none of them reported the dodgy dealing that was going on with the submarine contract, and how Scott Morrison's good friends, David Gazzard and Peter Costello, were profiting millions of dollars from that submarine contract. It's not believable they'd only get paid tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands. They would have been paid millions of dollars. They would have negotiated that for themselves. They would have said, look, if we can get this over the line, save you 100 million, 200 million, we want a percentage of that, or we want a fair whack of it. Anyhow, so that brings us to the COVID deal. Now, going back a few months, the government paid $80,000 to ECG Advisory Solutions. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? ECG Advisory Solutions, that's the one that did the deal with the submarines. DBG, and David Gazzard was a major shareholder of that, so was Peter Costello. But ECG Advisory Solutions, David Gazzard set that up, I think a couple of years ago. He's the only shareholder. There's 10 shares, he owns all 10. Now, that company was awarded $80,000 to advise the Department of Home Affairs on a new quarantine system or a new quarantine facility for students and foreign workers to come into the country. Now, there was no tender. The media reported it was a limited tender. Well, that's ridiculous, because there was no tender. I think using the term limited tender would deceive the public into thinking, well, it's not a full tender of say 5 or 10 people tendering, it's just a limited tender. Maybe they asked for 3 people to tender, or 3 companies. No, there was no tender. David Gazzard's company, ECG Advisory Solutions, was the only company asked to quote on it. So to say it was a limited tender in itself is a lie. There was no tender. Now, that leaves it wide open to fraud. It should never be allowed to happen under any circumstances. That's what Barnaby Joyce did. He got rid of the tender process when federal MP Angus Taylor wanted to funnel $80 million with a fraudulent and deceptive and deceitful water buyback scam over the Cayman Islands. I don't think the whole 80 million was funneled over there, but a fair whack of it was. So to make sure there was no difficulty, they got rid of the tender process. That's very important, because what the tender process is meant to do, having multiple people quote on the product, supplying the product or the service, it keeps the government employees honest, because they need to then justify how come they've chosen a certain company to supply the product or service. When there's no tender process, well, they virtually don't have to justify it, do they? Now, one of the key people in the ECG Advisory Solutions was none other than Scott Briggs. So they've gotten $80,000 for ECG Advisory Solutions. Scott Briggs, a few days later, who's part of that company. He's not a shareholder, but he's one of the advisors working for ECG Advisory Solutions. He goes and sets up another company called Quarantine Services Australia. He registers that company in his own name. Now, there's some strange happenings there, because a couple of months later he changes the name to the ACN number, the Australian company number. So it's like 555, 10, 10, 20, 30, Pty Limited. Weird as hell. Why he's done that, I don't know. It looks like he's done that to blur it so people can't work out who owns what. But he registered that company. They've set up a website. They're talking about how they're going to be running the business of the quarantine facility for international students and international workers. They say it's non-profit, but someone's going to have to profit somewhere along the line. It's not a charity where they're going to give away the quarantine services to the international workers and students for free. They're all going to have to pay, so someone's going to have to make money somewhere along the line. And why would this Scott Briggs be setting it up under his name in the first place? This DPG, too many companies everywhere. DPG Solutions, Advisory Solutions, why would they be advising to set up this company, or advising the government on how to structure the new quarantine service, and then all of a sudden one of the employees goes and sets up a company to do it? It's weird as hell if they're not going to be making a profit from it. Of course they're going to be making a profit. This statement on their website, it's non-profit, is not believable in any shape or form. Now, the Prime Minister's been asked about it, and he said it's slanderous for anyone to imply that he somehow his mates have somehow profited of it. Well, Scott Briggs also happens to be the president of the Liberal Party branch for Scott Morrison's electorate. Now, that shows you how tight they are. Scott Briggs, David Gazzard and Scott Morrison are all, very, very tight. And not just politically, but also business-wise. They're helping each other out left, right and centre. Now, that's how Scott Morrison is funneling money out of the government into the pocket of his friends. And you have to suspect that old Scott Morrison will be getting a kickback when he does leave politics, when he does either resign or be voted out as Prime Minister. And even for a seat of cook, he might lose that at the next election, who knows. Now, I'll be publishing an article on it on Thursday, 9th of December 2021. So make sure you visit my website, Kangaroo Court of Australia. And while you're there, you can join the free email subscription. And every time I publish a new article, you get an email that there's an article there to be read. And make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is also free. And please share this video and also the article on all social media such as Facebook and Twitter, and help promote it and help get the word out there, the scam Scott Morrison are running. Other than that, thank you for your time and have a good day.